What are the worst trades in NFL history? With the Broncos benching Russell Wilson for the rest of 2023 and planning to cut him after the season, they have cemented their trade with the Seahawks among the league's worst. Russ coined the phrase Broncos country let's ride, and now the only thing he'll be riding is pine. But is the Russ trade the worst trade in NFL history? Let's rank the top 10. At number 10, the Houston Oilers trade Steve Largent to the Seattle Seahawks for an 8th round pick. Houston gave up a little too quick with this one. They drafted Largent with a 4th round pick in 1976, only to trade him away a few months later for an 8th round pick. Why? Because they were just unimpressed with him as a player. In fact, they would have avoided this list altogether if they just stuck with their original plan, which was to cut him. They would have been on another list of maybe biggest mistakes in NFL history, but hey, at least they would have avoided the worst trades one. Instead, here they are. And here Steve Largent is as a top 20 receiver of all time and NFL Hall of Famer. In fact, when he retired, Largent was the league's all-time leader in receiving yards, before getting passed up later on by the Jerry Rices and Larry Fitzgeralds of the world. But this wouldn't be the last time a Houston franchise traded a great receiver for basically nothing, although it's technically a different Houston franchise, but whatever. At number 9, we've got the Bill O'Brien masterclass that signified the end of the Texans as we knew them, DeAndre Hopkins for David Johnson. The full details of the trade were DeAndre Hopkins and a 2020 4th round pick for David Johnson, a 2020 2nd round pick, and a 2021 4th round pick. Coming off back-to-back division titles in 2018 and 2019, O'Brien said, you know what we should do? Trade away our all-pro receiver. What happened next? Well, the Texans went 4-12, and it would be the last time we would ever see Bill O'Brien or DeShaun Watson on a Texan sideline ever again. Now, a lot of the worst trades in NFL history look that way because of hindsight. We get to see how it all plays out, and it becomes clear just how badly one team fleeced another. But this deal was bad even without hindsight. Trading your star quarterback's #1 target for a running back who was clearly on the decline made no sense then, and it makes no sense now. Granted, in hindsight, the fall of the Texans was inevitable anyway. Because even though this terrible 2020 season is what made DeShaun Watson request a trade, the legal issues that popped up shortly after would have likely necessitated a trade anyway. And we'll get to that one in a few minutes. At number 8, it's the Chicago Bears and their draft trade for arguably the worst quarterback on an NFL roster right now, Mitch Trubisky. In 2017, the Bears traded their number 3 overall pick, a 3rd rounder, a 4th rounder, and a 2018 3rd rounder to move up one spot and take their quarterback of the future. The only problem is he ended up being terrible. Look, this trade has to be on this list because it was a high-profile deal involving multiple draft picks for what was supposed to be a franchise quarterback who completely bombed out. But overall, I don't think it was that bad. People look back at this deal a lot more unfavorably because DeShaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes were selected shortly after Trubisky, but Trubisky was pretty much the consensus #1 quarterback by the time draft day arrived. Whether that was warranted or not is a different discussion, but the Bears weren't doing anything crazy with who they picked. And as far as what they gave up, yeah, it was a solid handful of draft picks, but it was nothing compared to some of the other deals we'll talk about. It was only 1 1st rounder and then a bunch of mid-round picks, and yes, one of those mid-round picks did turn out to be Fred Warner, but let's be honest, the Bears scouts aren't as good as the 49ers scouts. Chicago wasn't ending up with Fred Warner anyway. Number 7, the Chargers trade up to draft Ryan Leaf. Everyone talks about Ryan Leaf being one of the biggest busts in NFL history, but no one really talks about the trade the Chargers made to draft him in the first place. In 1998, the Chargers traded 2 1st-round picks, a 2nd round pick, and 2 players to the Cardinals so that they, much like the Bears in 2017, could move up one spot to number 2, ensuring that they would get one of the top 2 quarterbacks in the draft. They didn't really care who, just whoever went number 1, they would gladly take the other guy. Well, Peyton Manning went number 1, becoming one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, and Ryan Leaf went number 2, and went on to become a financial consultant. Not right away, that was in 2004 after he sucked at football for a few years, but yeah, didn't work out. Luckily, the Chargers found a pretty good quarterback shortly after, but this still has to sting. Number 6, the Packers trade for John Hael. We associate the Packers with having Hall of Fame quarterbacks basically all the time, but after Bart Starr retired and before Brett Favre came along, there was about 20 years of uncertainty at the quarterback position. One of the guys they turned to was 34-year-old John Hael. The Packers acquired him from the Rams midway through the 1974 season for 2 1st-round picks, 2 2nd-round picks, and a 3rd round pick. A massive draft pick haul for a guy that was completely washed up and ended up only being on the team for a year and a half. In his last year in Green Bay, Hael started 13 games and threw 6 touchdowns to 21 interceptions. To make matters worse, the Packers probably should have known Hael was declining, considering the last game he started for the Rams before being traded to the Packers was against the Packers, where he went 6 for 16 for 59 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and got benched. But Green Bay saw that performance and said, hey, let's trade away all our draft picks for this guy. He's the one. But look, there's being reckless with your draft picks. And then there's number 5. The Saints trade their entire draft class for Ricky Williams in 1999. Of all the trades throughout history, this is the one that I just can't even fathom happening in the age of social media. If we all picked up our phones to a notification that a team traded every single one of their draft picks for one player, NFL Twitter would explode. But that's what the Saints did, trading all their picks in the 1999 draft along with their 1st and 3rd round picks in 2000 to Washington for the number 5 overall pick and the right to select Ricky Williams. And it didn't work out. For either side, really. The Saints went 3-13 in Williams' first season, and head coach Mike Ditka, who orchestrated the trade, got fired. And although Williams was putting up good numbers, he only lasted 3 seasons in New Orleans before getting traded to Miami. Washington, meanwhile, did essentially nothing with the 8 draft picks they got from New Orleans. So all things considered, this trade was pretty brutal for both sides. Guys, once again, I have to give a shout out to our friends over at Jack Links for sponsoring this video. They have supplied me with so much beef jerky to get me through this season. I really can't thank them enough. And I mean, we're talking about every flavor you can think of. Original, peppered, sweet and hot, teriyaki, and many more. So no matter what flavor you're feeling, there's definitely some Jack Link's beef jerky out there for you. I'm gonna go with teriyaki today, but you go with whatever your little heart desires. Just make sure you try Jack Link's meat snacks today. All right, back to the video. Number 4, the 49ers trade 3 first-round picks for Trey Lance. It's hard to get much worse than trading 3 first-round picks for a guy who essentially never saw the field. Now, the Niners made this trade over a month before the 2021 draft, and there's been a lot of speculation that Mac Jones was their original target when they made this trade, and that they just got wrapped up in the Trey Lance hype in the month leading up to it. Either way, Trey did not pan out in San Francisco, and got traded to Dallas just 2 years later for only a 4th-round pick. 3 first-rounders for a guy whose career basically never got off the ground is wild, and the only reason the Niners don't get more flack for it is because Brock Purdy came along and saved the day. But even though San Francisco gave up all those picks, at least they didn't take on a huge financial burden to go along with it. Unlike number 3, the Broncos trade for Russell Wilson.
You ever done anything dangerous?
Shortly after missing out on Aaron Rodgers, the Broncos wasted no time going after a different franchise quarterback. They traded 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a 5th-round pick along with Drew Lock, Noah Fant, and Shelby Harris for Russell Wilson and a 4th-round pick. And immediately after, the Broncos signed Wilson to a 5-year, $245 million extension, including $165 million guaranteed. And now they're about to eat all that money. When Russ arrived in Denver, he still had 2 years left on his Seattle contract, which means he's about to be cut before that extension has even kicked in. At the time, it seemed like Russ was the missing piece for a Broncos roster ready to win a Super Bowl. Turns out all he was about to do was financially handicap the franchise for years to come, all while the Seahawks stay competitive and turn those draft picks into impact players. Broncos country, you tried. Number 2, the Vikings acquire Herschel Walker from the Dallas Cowboys for everything. The terms of this deal are jarring to look at, but essentially, the Vikings gave Dallas all the fuel they needed to spark their dynasty run in the 90s. Dallas got 5 players, 3 first-round picks, and 3 second-round picks. And some of the players those picks turned into include Hall of Famer Emmitt Smith, Pro Bowler Darren Woodson, and Pro Bowler Russell Maryland. Now, the Vikings thought Herschel Walker was their missing piece to winning a Super Bowl. Instead, they never even made the playoffs in their 2 full seasons with Walker, while the Cowboys went on to win 3 Super Bowls in the next 7 years. Without this trade, the Cowboys may have never become a dynasty, and Cowboys fans of today might be a lot less obnoxious. Thanks, Minnesota. And number 1, the Cleveland Browns trade for DeShaun Watson. I'm sure plenty of people will say the Walker deal should still be number 1, but the circumstances surrounding the DeShaun Watson trade just really put it over the top for me. DeShaun demanded a trade out of Houston, but in the midst of that demand got accused of being basically the worst human being of all time. And the Browns said, hey, we don't care, we want that guy, and we'll give you a ton of draft picks to get him. 3 first-rounders, a 3rd-rounder, and a 4th-rounder. And we're gonna pay him the most guaranteed money anyone has ever paid a quarterback. By a lot. So with all that, he better play well. He didn't play well. At first, people just assumed he was rusty because of all the time away from football, but he didn't look any better in his 2nd season as a Brown either, before ultimately going down for the season with a shoulder injury. So now the Browns have a quarterback who is a shell of his former self, they owe him a total of $230 million guaranteed, and they don't have a 1st-round pick until 2025. Good deal, Cleveland. You're lucky the rest of your team is good. But there you go, the worst trades in NFL history. Let me know in the comments if you think any other trade should be on this list, or if you'd change my order in any way. And of course, be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. As always, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.